I'm interested to talk about that though, because I know that community is like such a big focal point of the book. So we'll get to that as well. But I'm just rolling. We're recording. So we have Shalane Flanagan and Brad Stulberg on the show today. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, great to catch up with you guys.
I am really excited to talk to you both. We have to just like connect a little bit on North Carolina chat real quick because Brad and I are new residents. When did you move out here, Brad?
We are just past our 1 year anniversary, so we moved last July.
Oh, so you're really new still.
Yeah, I'm fresh.
And you're in Asheville.
Correct?
Love Asheville. Have you been to, I'm probably going to say it wrong, but is it Highland Brewing? Is that the brewery that, do you
Oh,
recognize
there are
that?
so many. New Belgium is like the big brewery down in our neighborhood, but Asheville is brewery central, and trail running central and mountain biking, and it's a wonderful place.
Well, we stopped there on our way out to Raleigh when we were looking at the area, trying to figure out where we wanted to live. And that was the brewery we went to. That it was so good for our kids because they could just run around and play. And it was just a really good atmosphere. So, me being the Raleigh person is giving you advice in Asheville. Go check it out.
Totally. Yeah, we're lucky to have all these breweries. I was gonna make like a poke at Gwen Jorgensen because she's doing this thing where she's like visiting all these places to live and like Asheville didn't meet her bar. It's like, all right, Gwen, well, good luck finding a place that does.
I
Was
think she complained about the sidewalk. She said there wasn't enough sidewalks for her.
Yeah, it's exactly what she said. Um, but you can't win it all. But there actually the sidewalk situation is a little bit bizarre. You do have to get out onto the trails to feel completely safe running because otherwise you are often just kind of running into traffic.
Yeah, that's really scary. I have to catch up on this. Is she doing like a video series on this?
Yeah, she is,
Okay.
or at least she was. My friend here that's like big in the running community sent me this and said, well, at least we're not going to have to worry about like all the runners from Boulder moving here because Gwen just told them it sucks.
Okay, but are they coming to Raleigh? Because we've got Amy's group out here. I feel like a lot of people are moving to North Carolina in general.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, I think they decided on Boulder actually. I think they're moving. It's official.
Oh, it's official. Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Last North Carolina piece, and we'll move on. Tell us your favorite thing about North Carolina, Shalane. I know you went to UNC.
Let's see. Well, the Tar Heels, anything Tar Heel sports. And then I just really miss barbecue, some good barbecue. I like the like cider vinegar barbecue. And out here on the West Coast, just not the same. So
Oh.
good food. Yep.
Do you have any recipes in any of your cookbooks with a good cider vinegar barbecue?
Good question. No, but maybe in the next one we should. So,
Okay. Yeah, put it on the list. I love it.
A
okay.
barbecue cookbook, that would be great.
Yes.
Okay, so Shalane, you just got back from Tokyo. Tell us real quick what it was like going to your fifth Olympics as a coach this time.
Let's see. Yeah, fifth Olympics, but during a pandemic, with no fans, and as a coach, completely different situation than going as an athlete with a normal Olympic experience. But it was super special nonetheless. Like the athletes were so appreciative to be there that it didn't impact their performances, but it was really strange to go into this massive stadium and you could hear a pin drop. It was really quiet. But the silver lining I felt like as a coach personally was I could get right up on the rail, literally be on the track and yelling at my athletes exactly what they needed to hear, what they wanted to hear, instructions on how to execute everything. So much more intimate experience in that aspect, but there was a lot of red tape. I was COVID tested every day. It was super hot and humid. It was just a unique experience, a once in a lifetime, unlike anything that we'll hopefully ever experience again. But there was definitely some positives to it. The ability to just walk around without massive crowds was kind of nice, but I look forward to Paris and it being more normal.
Oh, for sure. What were you saying to Courtney? Could you yell at her? Could she hear you?
Yes. Well, if anyone knows Courtney really well, her natural instinct is to not lead and be aggressive in a race. So it took a lot of coercion to build the confidence that she could execute a really aggressive race. So it was constant reinforcement that when she took the lead, that she was going to do something really big and that it was worth that commitment to doing something really scary. And we'd mentally prepared her, but still, as much as you mentally prepare and visualize, like, it's still intimidating. And so we're just constantly reinforcing that what she was doing was perfect and that she looked great and that she looked strong. And just, that ability to communicate and yell at her, I think really helped elevate her performance. And we almost saw her win gold because of it, I feel like.
It was so incredible. And, I talked to Courtney after the race and she talked to me about your chat with her she had some sickness beforehand and she really credited you to helping her in the mental space get in the right headspace for the race. Like, it happened. And this is kind of goes in with the book. We can get into the book. The practice of groundedness is that you're here now. Like, Courtney had to accept that she was in that moment, she was sick. And when she started feeling better, all she could focus on was being present and starting to feel better. And then when she got on the line, focus on being on that line. So talk to us a little bit about how you worked with her to get through that.
Yeah, so when we arrived in Hawaii as our heat and humidity training, Courtney came down with some type of food poisoning, some type of bug. And we were literally, 10 days to 14 days out from her first race in Tokyo. So obviously not optimal. This is very suboptimal to get sick beforehand. But, in the practice of groundedness, Brad explains acceptance, right? We had to accept what was happening. We couldn't fight it. We had to accept where we were and then come up with a plan and control what we can control of where we want to be within 10 to 14 days and take, actionable steps to that. But panicking and worrying about what we couldn't control, the fact that she couldn't keep fluids in or food in, we just had to take it day by day, hour by hour. We tried to do a workout one day. She couldn't complete it because she was throwing up. So we just said, okay, well, we're done for today. What can we do tomorrow? What, fluids can we get in you? And fortunately, I had been in a very similar situation. So I could draw upon my experience as an athlete. Before I won my Olympic silver medal in Beijing, I actually got severe food poisoning in China and couldn't even get on the plane to go to the Olympic Village. And, it was an all-time low. And really, in a way, it alleviated a lot of pressure to a degree because I just felt like, well, when I get on the start line, I'm going to just feel so grateful to be here and just with my health and the ability to just be here. But yeah, with Courtney, I just said, listen, I've been here before. You're going to be fine. We'll take all these steps to get you healthy. And you know what? Sometimes these things that look like disaster, they actually are a blessing in disguise. She was more tapered and more well-rested in a weird way. Yes, she was sick. But once she got over the sickness, I told her, I was like, Courtney, you're going to actually feel amazing. I've been here before. And I think just that reassurance that she was going to be okay, but we had to accept the situation in which we were in and then move forward. And just the biggest asset, I think, was the mindset that we put ourselves in. And it was constant positivity. And yes, this sucks, but I constantly reminded her, your mind controls a lot, Courtney. So how we think about what's happening to you has a huge impact. And I think just leaning into her support system and all of us helping her get back to that good mindset really had a huge impact.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it had to be reassuring to her that you had been through that, pretty much the exact situation, and you got the silver medal, and then she got the silver medal. It's so exciting. And then Mohamed, he got a silver medal. I mean, this Olympic cycle, it's just it was such a strange year for it. But obviously, Courtney's silver medal probably tops the charts of of excitement, but comment on Molly Seidel getting third, or was she second or third?
Third,
Yeah. Third in the marathon. I mean, that to me was the most exciting thing I think I'd seen in the Olympics.
Yeah. I woke up in Tokyo. I'd had a really late night at the track, and woke up to maybe about 30K into the race, because they had switched it an hour earlier because of the heat and humidity. It was a huge factor for a lot of the athletes. So they made a smart decision, made it earlier. But as a result, because I got back from the track at like 2, I missed like the first hour. So I woke up and just saw Molly throwing herself full throttle into the race and sticking her nose in it, being super gritty. And I just thought, you know what, there's going to be a big opportunity here. I could just sense her willingness to just hurt and to just go for it and go all in. And I just felt like something special was going to happen. And obviously she just put herself in the position to just be there and capitalize in the moment. And she just, she did it, which I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised. I've known Molly for a long time. I actually met her in high school, and she had the tools, not only physically, but I feel like mentally, to be at this level. And I'm just happy that she was able to take time away from the sport, 4 or 5 years ago to get healthy. And, I think the mental aspect she talks about and her eating disorder were huge. It was a huge turning point in her career. And I think we're seeing, obviously, those choices that she made 4 or 5 years ago pay off big dividends now.
Yeah. She looked like she was in pain, like early on. I mean, I was like, how is she going to do this? But she just kept doing. And I love what you said, her willingness to be in pain. You got to do that.
Yeah, you got to commit to getting uncomfortable for a really long time, and that's the marathon. Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I don't know Molly, but I have to imagine that, like, the pain of being in the thick of struggling with disordered eating is probably harder than the pain in the marathon. And it's not to say that you'd ever want something like that to teach you to be tough. But I do think, like, the pain of a marathon is voluntary, and an eating disorder feels very involuntary. So my sense is, like, that ability to grind and grit, she probably has a higher capacity for that than she did before, and than most people do.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And on that note, when we're talking about like issues that are related to mental health, I mean, an eating disorder is very much, you have a mental hold. There's a mental hold on how you think about food and moving your body and all those things. Let's dive into your diagnosis with OCD, Brad, and talk about how that has been a part of your writing journey and pieces of this book. The Practice of Groundedness. How does that kind of overlap?
Yeah, so the context is just a few months after my first book came out, which is called Peak Performance, and we talked about that book way back in the day here on this show. I had really stark onset obsessive compulsive disorder. So I had no history of anxiety, depression, anything like that. But it very quickly just swallowed me. And I think it's worth taking a second to explain, because OCD is often so misrepresented. People think of it as like being a neat freak or needing to have things in order. But that's not really what it is. It is repetitive, intrusive thoughts that tend to cling on to things that are really important to you, followed by just terrible feelings associated with those thoughts. And for me, it was like a very depressive, what's the point of life? We're all going to die anyways. How do you make meaning? On and on and on. And I can say those things now in a rational way, but when those thoughts are accompanied by such anxiety or despair, they just become all consuming. And this happened to me, 3 months after Peak Performance came out. And I remember getting emails from people, mostly young men, saying, hey, like, you're only 30 years old. You've got this book that's a commercial success. Like, you coach these people. How do you have it all together? And I just remember being like, oh shit, like, if only you knew. And at a certain point, the cognitive dissonance of, on the one hand, suffering so much with this OCD on the inside, and to those that really know me, and on the other hand, on the outside, being seen as like this expert on performance, that almost became as bad as the OCD itself. So I remember talking to my therapist. I'm like, I either need to stop writing or somehow close this gap. And over time, she encouraged me that the thing to do that would enlarge my life, not diminish it, is not to stop writing, but instead to close the gap and to not only be vulnerable in doing it, but to reconcile that, hey, you can be a coach, you can be an expert in peak performance, and at the same time, really struggle with these things. So that was a good 8 months of being pretty sick, weekly therapy, and slowly but surely getting out of the woods, again, with the help of just a phenomenal therapist. There's very specific treatments for OCD that, thank goodness, tend to work. And I got on the other side of that, and I said, well, what do I want my next writing project to be? And OCD, depression, anxiety, all of these things are syndromes, and they're super complex. They're partially environment, partially biology, and partially we have no idea. But there was a part of me that's like, what patterns was I in before this happened that might have contributed to it? And when I stepped back and evaluated, it was kind of like a frenetic energy in my life that wasn't bad. It was really good. Like, I'm in a wonderful marriage, my book's doing well, but I was just kind of like all over the place always. And that's when I realized that when the rug got swept out from underneath me, like there was no foundation, there was no floor. And that made me start thinking, well, what does it look like to build a really solid base for life? We think about it all the time in training, but what does it look like in life? And then I started realizing the paradox is, like, the better things are going, the more you disregard that base. Because you're writing books, you're having fun, you're traveling, you're like doing all this stuff. And it's easy to neglect those things that become the foundation. So I started doing some research, I started talking to people, and I realized that, like, I'm not the only person that's had this happen. And I'm certainly not the only person that feels a little bit unmoored. And we clearly live in a culture that is very much about being busy and fast-paced and frenetic energy. And that's when I had this idea to explore, well, what would it look like to do the equivalent in running of building a really foundational, solid base for not just running, but for all of life? And then to continue the training analogy, how do you not leave that base behind when you start fine-tuning? So when you're trying to get promoted at work, or when you're about to peak for a race, or when you have a book coming out, or whatever it might be, how do you not leave some of those core fundamental attributes behind so that that strong, solid foundation is always there?
Yeah, I relate to that so much because I think that when we have a lot going on, like Chalene was just saying, like in Tokyo, you were so busy that it was hard to be away from your son, but you had things to do, right? So like the sadness of missing him was like a little bit overshadowed by being busy. And I think that when we're busy and we have a lot on our plate and exciting things happening, like for me, hitting publish on an episode, just like even the simple things in life, once that's done, like in the end, what we're all looking for is fulfillment. And when all that busyness is over, or like after a big marathon, if you don't have that foundation, where do you go?
Yeah, that's it. And it's so important, because it's not to say that we shouldn't do these things, that like we should try to win medals and we should write books and we should try to get promoted and we should publish podcasts. And as you said, without that foundation, when all that kind of shuts down and gets quiet, well, then what's there? You see this so frequently, and it's something that Chalene and I have discussed quite a bit in transitions. So you go all in on something. In Shalane's case, it's a sport. And then it's time to transition out of competing. Well, what's there when that sport's gone? You see it in parenting. You go all in on parenting and then your kids move out. Well, what's there? Like, we know that people suffer from depression and marriages tend to fall apart when kids move out. So it's this very common theme. It's extremely human. It cuts across so many different domains of life. And like, again, the question that the book tries to answer is, what's the basic hygiene we can do? Not to avoid the pain of those things. Those things are going to be hard. They're going to hurt, but to have enough of a foundation to like stand strong amidst it. And that's really the question that the book tries to answer.
Wow. I don't know why I've never thought of it like that. And I'm curious, Chalene, now that you're a parent, just thinking through your career, you know, like the decades of this like incredible career and hanging that up and moving on to the next thing. Do you see that now as a parent? Like, do you think about Jack being 18 and what that will be like?
No, I don't want to think about that
I
yet.
know. It's so hard.
But yeah, I mean, it does a little bit enter my mind only because Jerry Schumacher, my previous coach, who coached me, and now I get to work, my mentor, and I get to work alongside all of his kids are starting to go off to college, and just watching how the family dynamic shifts and changes, and then as parents, having to let go and into the big scary world. And it's kind of nice, you get to control them within your own home, but then when they're gone, it's he says it's even harder than when they're little, because it's just really letting go. And but yeah, Brad and I have talked about the pendulum swinging to extremes, right? Like when you go all in on anything in life, like you said, like parenting, writing a book, and training for the Olympics. When the pendulum swings back, it's all in, working really hard, so singularly focused, and then it swings back to the extreme of not much going on. And a lot of the Olympic athletes are experiencing this right now. If they don't have a good foundation, like Brad's talking about, there is a propensity to just feel really down and lost and don't know what their sense of purpose is. Like you've had a reason to get out of bed every morning and excited about something in your life that you could go all in on. And then when that's taken away, you're kind of left with like, well, what am I good at? Like, what's the point of my day? You feel really lost, and like you miss that fulfilling sense of going all in on something. And, Brad really helped me in a crucial time of transitioning out of being an athlete, going through some knee surgeries, and kind of like just grappling with like, well, what's next and what can I get excited about? And like, it was hard. It was like, even though I was excited to do something different and I've been preparing myself for it, as much as you can prepare, it's still not easy. It's still uncomfortable. Like I would describe transitions as, yeah, it can be really sad, but more than anything, just really uncomfortable. Like you're like, who am I now without that one thing? And there's nothing easy about it. And it can get better day to day, but it takes a while.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned was like, you finish the Olympics and then you have, your day to day. What is my day to day now? And one of the points in the book that you talk about, Brad, is activation energy. So can you hit on that?
For sure. So there's this misconception that you've got to be feeling good to get going. And you have to be like super motivated and inspired to go do anything, whether it's a running workout or just getting out of bed, right? So many books on like positive thinking and, starting off your day with energy and bulletproof coffee and all this stuff. But what the research shows is that mood actually comes second to action. So you can't change how you're thinking or feeling, but you can nudge yourself into action. And by acting, you can change your mood. So the pithy way I like to think about it is you don't need to feel good to get going. You need to get going to give yourself a chance at feeling good. And we know that this works because it is the gold standard treatment for clinical depression. So when applied to the ultimate extreme, cannot get out of bed, the goal isn't to try to change someone's thoughts or what they're feeling in their chest or their body to make them want to get out of bed. The goal is actually to teach that person that you can feel this way and be kind to yourself and not like feeling this way. And even if it feels like running a freaking marathon, you can still start your workout. You can still do a load of laundry. You can still show up to talk to your friends. Because what those feelings tend to do is they build on themselves, right? Because now like, well, I haven't really been activated in 2 days, and then you lose the confidence. Like, well, am I always going to be like this? Or I don't really want to be in a social situation because I haven't. And it's breaking through and doing that. Now, the nuance here is that if you're struggling with just exhaustion and burnout, sometimes you actually do want to like stay in bed. And that is the positive thing. So I talk about there being two kinds of rest and shutdown. There's productive rest and shutdown when you're actually tired and you actually need to recharge. And then there's your mind-body system tricking you and telling you that like you actually need to recharge, when in fact what you need is to kind of spurt yourself into action. And with COVID in particular, so many people are going through this, myself included. Like I used to love working out because I'd go to a gym and I'd be in a community. And now I'm in my basement. And I probably trained like 250 days last year, and maybe 6 of those days did I want to. Like, it's been a struggle. And again, I write these books. Like, I used to pop out of bed. It's a lot harder. Part of it is I have a kid, I'm always tired, but no doubt part of it is the normal things in our life that kind of like keep us going from day to day, week to week, have changed so drastically because of this pandemic that it's been easier to slip into this inertia of like not really getting going. And then you lose the motivation. And what I argue in the book and what the research shows is that the only way you're going to get that motivation back is by kind of pushing through the rut and taking action. And then the second part of that is you don't just want to take any action, like, because you could go get pissed drunk. That's probably not a productive action. You want to act in alignment with your values. So if one of your values is health, maybe you want to cook a meal, or maybe you want to exercise. If one of your values is community, even if you'd rather just text your friend and flake out, you should go schlep your ass to the trail and meet your friend for a run or a walk. And these are the things that then give you a chance to snap out of it and feel better.
You always feel better when you go. You
Yes.
always feel better after the
Yeah,
fact.
but not judging yourself. So there's like a self-compassion. It's not like, oh, you're being lazy, you need to go. It's like, oh, wow, like, it's really hard. I'm parenting in a pandemic. Like, my usual sources of excitement are gone. I feel like crap. And my mind body is telling me not to go. And I can appreciate that, but I know deep down inside the thing is go. So I'm just going to take you with me, thoughts and feelings that are saying not to go, and give myself a chance. That's like the inner dialogue.
Yeah. And I want to put an asterisk next to that because I said you always feel better when you go. And I will say there are times when it does feel good to, I don't know, cancel plans or whatever and stay on the couch. But yesterday, I dropped my kids off at school. It is like 90 degrees, so hot and humid here. And I was like, you're going to commit to running 30 minutes just to like get your day going. And I ran a 1.5 miles. And I was like, this is miserable. Like, I am enjoying none of this. So I said, you gave yourself a chance, Lindsay. Like, you ran for like 12 minutes or whatever. You can stop now and just walk. And then I skipped my leg workout that day because I was just tired. And I'm saying that to say to the listeners that I said, you always feel better after you go, but sometimes it's okay to not go,
Yeah, that's wisdom. Like, people ask me, how do you know when what you actually need is true shutdown and rest? And how do you know when what you actually need to do is kind of force yourself through? And man, if you could develop like a wrist tracker that could give you that answer, you'd be wealthy. But no heart rate variability, no device is going to tell you the true answer to that. Ultimately, you just have to pay close attention and kind of say, like, here's what I tried, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's what I'm getting out of this. But it's tricky. Like, I mean, you could argue that is the definition of wisdom, is like, this is non-dual. Sometimes A works, sometimes B works. And wisdom is learning yourself well enough to know when. I think that people tend to err on the side of kind of assuming that you need to be feeling good to get going.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk about the principles of groundedness. And I'm curious, Chalene, if you were familiar with these things like throughout your career, or is this something you started really working on once you transitioned? Acceptance, presence, and patience are the 3 principles, correct?
There's acceptance, presence, patience, and then the second half, there's also vulnerability, community, which Chalene is like, the star of in the running world. So she knows that one well. So then those are the others.
Yeah, I mean, they all resonated with me. Like, when Brad lays it out in his book, like, every time, like, what I love about Brad's books is, like, I read it and I'm like, oh yeah, like, I knew that, or oh yeah, like, that's so simple, like, so applicable, like, to my life, and like probably thoughts I've had in my head, but he articulates it and reinforces and backs it so well. So it's like, I joke that I find myself just like underlining every sentence in his book, and I'm like, well, what's the point? I underlined everything. Like, it all resonates with me. It's like he's inside my head sometimes. But yeah, for sure, the one that really obviously sticks out is community. I really believe strongly in just surrounding yourself with great people, and then hopefully, if you surround yourself with people that have the same values or are, have a skill set that you want to acquire or you want to be like, you can only elevate yourself as a person, hopefully, by surrounding yourself with good people. And in the end, I think you enjoy the journey of whatever you're doing a lot more if you have great people around you. Like, I get a lot of, athletes who are looking to potentially like move on to the next steps in life. And I'm not a life coach like Brad, but I do reinforce, like, the one thing that I take away from my transition is, I wanted to stay in the running community because I really love the people in the running community. And I felt like if I go and I work every day with people that I like, I'm going to be a happier person. I'm going to come home. I'm going to be a better wife. I'm going to be a better mom, a better daughter, sister. And I think it has a huge impact on how it transcends to everything. So community is the one that obviously really resonates with me.
Yeah, and I think the other thing there is being with people that have like been where you're going is so helpful. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sure that your, programming and periodization and all that for Courtney is 100% gold. And my guess is just the fact that you could put your hand on her shoulder 14 days before the race and be like, I've been here too. Like, this sucks. I know exactly what you're thinking. It sucks. And it's going to be okay. Like, without doing that, I doubt she would have won a silver medal. You can't know, but just like that's the other part of community that's so important, is not just like the performative showing up, but like the real deep, like what you're experiencing is not unique, and like, I'm here. That's priceless. And it's so great in sport because it happens, but out in the world, like in our like hustle culture obsession with optimization, that's the first thing that gets cut out because it's really inefficient to show up for people. It takes time, it takes energy, and you can do way too much of it. Like, compassion fatigue is real. So again, it's not to say like never do anything for yourself, only show up for other people. But I think currently the pendulum has swung so far in the direction of everything has to be efficient, everything has to be optimal, and what gets crowded out is community.
Yeah, and that's especially hard. That was especially hard in 2020. I mean, it's a lot easier now. I mean, especially in the summertime, but yeah, I mean, that was really, really, I think I'm a pretty extroverted person, and I don't know if you guys know the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 7, and I just need to be around people to thrive. And it's interesting. I don't know if your significant others are, different in that way from you, but like my husband could be so happy just like being with our family, and we could go 4 weeks and not see a friend, and it just wouldn't even, he doesn't care. But, then if we do see people, he is happy, but it's not as necessary for him in his happiness.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a temperamental bias there. And I think if you are very extroverted and you thrive off the energy of other people, then the pandemic has been even harder. And, the other thing I'd say is, like, back to the value of community, hopefully the pandemic has reminded us that like what's actually really important are these relationships and the people that we surround ourselves with. Because when that was taken away, that like added extra layers of hurt. Because normally when things are really hard, like you go to your people. And I think what made this extra hard is like going to your people became much more complicated and at times risky.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about is, we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but accepting what's happening and like being here in the moment. And for me, one of the things I really struggle with is like health related fears. Like, that's just, you talked about your OCD, like that has had a really big stronghold on my head for a very long time. And I'm going to read one of the things that you wrote. It says, what if this fear of irrelevance, failure, losing control, running out of time, embarrassment, or death is simply an unavoidable part of the human condition? And so then you get into talking about like emotional flexibility. And I think that that's something a lot of us probably need to talk to somebody about if we struggle with that on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, I think so. And what I'm trying to say there is, so like health related fears that perhaps ladder up to like fear of dying.
Right.
Totally normal thing. I think most humans have that. And if you look on the other side of that fear, well, what's the opposite of death?
Living.
Life. Right. So like that is your value. And like the fear of death is actually like making your life smaller when you give into it, because like you're sitting there worrying about something in the future instead of living your life. So if these fears are like, yeah, repetitive times, multiple times a day, absolutely. Like reading my book's going to help, but go find a therapist that can like really hold your hand and walk with you. The flip side is like these fears are also normal to have, and trying to repress them or run away from them often just makes them worse. And what can be really helpful is to say, well, you know, what's the opposite of the fear? And that's the thing I value. And then that's the thing like I need to be pointing towards. I think courage is like going and living even though you're scared of dying, not letting the fear contract you. Does that make sense? Contract, excuse me.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of therapy that I've gone through to help me see these things in a lot of writing and research, but it doesn't make it easy. Like it is hard to like, we're the only species that knows that we're going to die.
So I'm not the only one living like this.
No.
Well, I mean, during COVID and the pandemic, I mean, I think it's so easy to get caught up in like, oh, I'm not going to go do this. I'm not going to go do that because I'm so afraid. My children are going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. And so it's easy to just be standstill and not live. So it's very applicable, like that statement, to our current times right now.
Yes. I love that. The opposite of the fear of death is living. I know. I think about all the wasted energy and minutes of my life I have spent on that, when I could have been just like, you know, fully embracing whatever that moment could have been.
Yes. I have a really, I have a story in it, and I'll tell it because it's quick. But I know someone that like struggles with similar related fears and like would constantly take their blood pressure. And their therapist is like, well, one day your blood pressure is going to be high and one day your heart's going to stop beating. So like, what does it matter? Like, why? And again, right, if you're taking your blood pressure because it might be high and medication can help you, that's very responsible behavior. But once it gets into this fear mode or like this compulsive mode, then I think it's worth asking yourself, like, well, is this avoidable? And if not, like, why don't I actually do the thing that's opposite to it? And that's a big part of acceptance. Because again, repressing the fear never works. Trying to think your way out of it or like change how you feel never works. But saying, oh, wow, like this is real. This is something that is holding me back. And I'm not going to judge myself. I'm just going to notice it. And I'm going to take it along with me. Even if it's telling me don't go, just take that fear along with you and then see how you feel after. I think that, I mean, Chalene, I'd be curious if during your transition out of competing as an athlete, like, was there an element of this kind of fear of, you kind of mentioned, like, who am I? Or what am I going to do if I don't run? And my sense is like, there was no switch that you could flick and be like, well, now I'm Coach Chalene. It was probably a slog of like having those tough days and taking those thoughts and feelings with you and just moving in the direction of your values anyways, which was so community focused.
Yeah, I absolutely had a fear of not having a purpose. I had so much purpose with my running and it consumed me and it was wonderful. But yeah, I was terrified of not having any purpose in my day. And that was, like I said, really uncomfortable. And I didn't like sitting and I didn't have much to do. There was this awkward time period that you and I talked about where like, I didn't really have a lot going on and I wasn't used to that. I was used to being very stimulated, very busy, very purposeful, and to just kind of sit and accept that maybe this is a time to just kind of sit and wait to see what my next adventure was going to be was really awkward, really uncomfortable. And even in the transition of coaching, like I didn't exactly, I knew I had the capability of being a great coach, but I also felt a bit of an imposter syndrome with it. Like I didn't really belong, even though I had a ton of experience in the sport. But it's like, how do I translate that to actually helping other people? And what are my skills as a coach? And I had to develop and find out what are my strengths and weaknesses and where do I need to learn things. And It was for sure, especially the first year coaching, I didn't love it, to be honest, at first, because I didn't really know if I was good at it. And I'm like, maybe this isn't for me. But it was also a weird time period because it was the pandemic, and talk about like your circle of community really shrinking down to its core. And I did get to see my athletes, but not in the way that a typical coach athlete working relationship should be, which normally is like a lot of in-person interaction, which I thrive on. I don't love texting and calling as much. I'd rather see my athletes because I get to, like, I am much more intuitive if I see people. And I enjoy that part of coaching a lot more than trying to text and call and trying to get information out of my athletes. I like to see them move. I like to see their expressions, like way more intuitive in that aspect. So I was so fearful of just not having purpose in my life. And, you know, the biggest blessing for sure is becoming a parent. I can't think of a bigger calling of purpose than trying to take care of a little human and providing for them. But yeah, it's taken a while to get to feeling like that same sense of purpose again, but it has resumed, but it's in a different way now. And I love it. But for a while, like a year, I was like, man, this is really hard. I'm struggling big time.
Yeah. And that's when community, I think, is like so important to have, is like a safety net almost. Because another one of these myths that I think like the book takes on and addresses, at least I try to, is we're sold that everything has to be meaningful always. And it's really nice when everything is meaningful always. And if we're lucky, we have stretches of years and years in our life where everything feels meaningful always. But sometimes things just feel blah. Like there is no purpose, there is no meaning. And it doesn't mean you have to like it, but the extra layer of like judgment or shame or I should, in the book I say like should is like don't should on yourself, i.e. don't shit on yourself. Like I should have meaning, I shouldn't feel this way. That never helps. It only makes things worse. Instead of accepting like, wow, like things feel really meaningless, really purposeless. It's scary. I better pick up the phone and call someone and talk to them about this. That is so much more effective than like the shame or guilt of trying to carry that with you, because everyone that I've talked to that's over 50 has had a period in their life where they felt devoid of meaning. It's like taboo to talk about, but when you know that it's totally normal, then when that period comes, you're not as scared by it and you're not as thrown off by it. And then the other comment, Chalene, is I hope it's okay to say this. I distinctly remember a conversation I had when you were feeling some imposter syndrome around working with Jerry, because not only had Jerry coached you, but like you look up to Jerry so much as a coach. And I just remember telling you like, well, you're not going to be Coach Jerry, and that's okay. Like you're going to be Coach Chalene. Like Jerry is a dude, not a woman. Jerry never ran at the level that you ran. Like there's so many differences, and trying to be Jerry makes no sense. And Jerry's a phenomenal coach, and you'll have to grow into your own phenomenal coach. And like that tweak seemed to like kind of like hit on something in your brain where you're like, oh yeah, like I don't have to be Jerry. I can't be Jerry. Yeah. And I'm not going to be better or worse. I'm going to be different.
Yeah. I mean, the world doesn't need another Jerry. Jerry is Jerry. And I realized that I have different strengths and assets. And so kind of like throwing and leaning into those skill sets that I have definitely helped me. Like when the athletes are given a workout and, you know, I can feel in my bones the fatigue of what they're going through and the discomfort and the mental games that they're playing with themselves and callousing of the brain, like, and it's so fresh within me. My compassion level for what they're doing is very different than what Jerry can relate to. So yeah, that really helped like switch things for me to really realize like, oh, I have something to offer and it's not what Jerry can offer. And that makes what I do unique and special in its own way.
I mean, I've talked to several of the ladies that you coach, and the way that they express their gratitude towards you being one of their coaches is really special. And I think as a female, it probably is really nice to have a female coach. I mean, I know Jerry was your coach, but there's something to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a comfort level of what they will disclose to me versus what they will share with Jerry. I like to think of myself as also more of like a life coach in general too. You know, it's not just the X's and O's of training that they talk to me about. It's actually usually not about that. It's usually about other life things. It's about their health, their nutrition, what's going on in their life, the ups and downs, things that they're struggling with or they're excited about. So no, I'm very grateful to be in the position to work with incredible athletes, men and women. You know, I'm not exclusive to just the women's team. I obviously have an intimate, more like closer relationship with them, but there's some men that you know, I've been able to work with that have sought out my advice, and it's been extremely rewarding. Yeah.
I'm curious, when you were walking through that imposter syndrome, what were some things you did to overcome those feelings?
I think it's kind of like Brad says, it's like accepting that I have those feelings. Like, okay, I feel like an imposter. And I think it just takes time to kind of grow out of the feeling to a degree, and then giving myself a pat on the back when I do feel like I do a good job and I do have a skill that maybe not everyone has, or I have something unique to offer. But I think it takes time. Like any transition in life is just uncomfortable and hard, and to think that it's going to be always easy and smooth is unrealistic. And so I think I thought, oh, like this will be so smooth, I'll just go straight seamlessly into being a coach. And you know, I've already like been thinking about it, so if I think about it enough, it's just going to happen. But I think just accepting that I felt awkward and uncomfortable, and then just kind of moving through it. And I don't know when I stopped feeling that way, but I definitely don't. Like when people would reference, be like, oh, hey, coach. And I'd look around to look for other coaches, and I'd be like, oh, they're talking to me. Oh, yeah, I am a coach. But I'd say it took like a full year, but it's not like I set like a timeline of when to stop feeling that way. I think I grew into my own self and what I had to offer, and just developed more confidence slowly. And yeah, just feeling like, you know, I don't know, just feeling like I was actually helpful started to help me. So.
Brad, somewhere in the book you mentioned that you have these books that you have had like 4-time Olympians read to help them with their practice of groundedness. What are some of the books?
I should ask Chalene what ones were most effective.
You gave me like 10, and I love to read, so I definitely read pretty much. I mean, I don't know if I ordered all of them, but there was a lot to sift through. But I think you referenced even some in your book. I think it was Not. Is it N-A?
Thich Nhat Hanh. Yeah,
he's one of my favorites. But yeah, you should dive into which books are recommended.
I think he's my favorite that you quoted in the book. Like of all the different things you quoted, I was like always resonating with what you said that you learned from him.
In the most like as a writer, and then I want to table imposter syndrome because I have another thought on that. But as a writer, speaking of imposter syndrome, like I am just in a lineage of like other writers and thinkers. Like anything that is new is just me combining old ideas in perhaps slightly different ways. So like you could say that the most important pages in this book are the last few, where I have like a reading list of all the other books that influence this book. And back to imposter syndrome, I think that anyone that doesn't experience any imposter syndrome, I'm super suspect of.
Yes.
Like who on earth could think like, oh, I'm just going to coach a bunch of Olympians and I'm going to own it and I'm not going to have any doubt. That's not somebody that I would want to coach. I mean, I have tons of imposter syndrome. Like to this day, like what on earth am I going to teach Shalane Flanagan about performance? Are you kidding me? Like I'm some middle-aged bald dude in North Carolina. And in all seriousness, I think that, again, it's one of these things that's non-dual. Too much of it can absolutely be crippling and it's an issue. But like the flip side of having enough imposter syndrome is just another way to be humble. And you look at all these people out there in the world who like come off as completely buttoned up and put together, and probably in like 95% of those cases, they end in some kind of terrible scandal. So I'm very hesitant of anyone that doesn't have some feeling of doubt. Like it's completely normal to have to have doubt. A good running analogy, and I got this from Steve Magnus, who I know you all know, and who's a very close, like my closest collaborative partner and friend, is we often feel imposter syndrome when we go speak in like big corporate audiences, because that's not our world. And one time I was like riding in the back of an Uber with Steve. I'm like, dude, I'm pretty nervous right now. Steve's like, oh yeah, my palms are sweating. I'm like, well, shit. He's like, just wait for the gun to go off. And what he meant by that is, like a former high school prodigy runner, like you can be super nervous on the start line of a race, and that's okay. But once the gun goes off and you're running, you're doing your thing. So in this case, it wasn't about trying to calm ourselves down. It was like, let's make sure that the first 3 points we hit on in this presentation to a room of thousands of people are things we really know well. So it's similar to a runner. Like, let's make sure out the gate I really settle in and feel good. And then you're just doing the thing. So in coaching, my Chalene is like those feelings of imposter syndrome were probably the highest, not in the middle of a workout when you were fully engaged in coaching. It was probably like leading up to a workout or after a workout or on social media, looking at other coaches, whatever it might be. Which again, it's okay. It's like, then once you start doing the thing, you get lost in the thing itself. And then those feelings kind of get to the wayside.
Absolutely, completely. I think, the pandemic, like I said, I couldn't really coach. So I sat there and thought about coaching, but didn't actually do the thing. So the sitting and thinking about like my contributions made it worse than actually getting into practice, helping athletes, communicating. Then I felt good, but it was like sitting around being like, I'm a coach, but I'm not actually doing the thing, and the thinking about it made it worse.
Yeah, I haven't spoken in front of thousands, but anytime I have spoke, especially in front of like a live audience or like live TV or something like that, I have to, it goes back to the presence thing. What I tell myself is like, you are here right now. This is what you are doing. You're not escaping this moment. And once I accept that, I know that like my confidence goes up and I can just like settle into what we're doing. Because if you try to be anywhere else, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, 100%. There's this story in the book. I forgot the name because I don't disclose the identity of people that I coach. So I forgot the name that I gave this person, but really, really, really struggled with people asking her, like, are you ready? Because then she had all these doubts, like, well, am I ready? I could always be more ready. And we kind of tried to switch the self-talk track in her mind to just, I'm as ready as I'm going to be. Because that's the truth. Like, she wasn't lying to her brain. Like, in that moment, like, are you ready? I'm as ready as I'm going to be. And what you just mentioned about sometimes when you feel nerves before like speaking on live TV or whatever, it's like, well, I'm as ready as I'm going to be. And there's research that shows this, back to acceptance, that fighting those feelings of restlessness or angst or nervousness tends to actually make them worse. Because unless you're like a master at meditation or breathing, which most of us aren't, what happens is when you try to calm down, you don't. And then you start freaking out that I've tried to calm down and I'm still not calm. So now like things must really be on the fritz. So like the more evidence-based path is actually to be like, oh yeah, like I'm sweating. I'm really nervous right now. And that's okay. Like I'm nervous because of course I am. And I know I'm prepared. And once I get into doing the actual thing, the nerves will either float away or I'll take them with me for the ride.
Shalane, can you talk about nerves a little bit? Like what were some things you did throughout your career to work through nerves on big stages?
Yeah, to me, I always tell the athletes, nerves are a symbol of you caring, right? Like you're nervous because you care about something, and that makes you super vulnerable because like you put your heart and soul and everything into something that you're about to do. So it's not a bad thing. Obviously, nerves can actually elevate performance, but when it becomes debilitating or compromising of a result in the performance, there's obviously like a tipping point. I had super bad nerves in high school and even in college. And I learned how, to manage those nerves and fuel them and put them in a good place. But I had to practice a lot of visualization. But also, what I talk about with my athletes too is don't try to be someone you're not. Like sometimes we get so nervous because we're trying to be like superhuman and a performance that's beyond us or that's not really us. Like we're trying to be someone or something that we're not. So I think sometimes I tell the athletes like everything you have that's within you is enough. And so that kind of is like a calming mantra is like everything I've done, everything I'm prepared, like everything that's within me is going to be enough. I don't have to be superhuman. I don't have to do anything extra. I've prepared and it's going to be what it's going to be. And to try not to force things. When we try to force things, we don't enter into that like state of flow. And flow is super important in terms of like performance and being really present. But nerves are tricky because they're an asset, but they also can, if there's a tipping point of it becoming negative.
Wow, flow and presence are two of the talking points I had, and we hadn't hit on flow yet. So let's just talk about flow. And when I think about flow, I thought through everything, and I thought through my life, and I was like, okay, flow with my kids, like what our evening routine is, flow with my podcast, flow when I'm writing, flow when I'm interviewing, whatever it is. Sometimes it's hard to get into a flow, especially the last 18 months with kids at home, right? Like I'm trying to like prep for a podcast or whatever, and like kids are running in and out of the room, and getting in the flow is so hard. But maybe we can talk about some key ways to make that happen. Like how do we get into the flow?
Yeah, this is another one of these $1 million questions. I wish there was like a supplement that I could sell to get into the flow. No such thing exists. So, well, the first thing is this was one of the most, and I'm going to speak of it as like writer researcher and then offer a few tips, and then turn it over to Chalene to talk about this as like athlete, like on the line and on the world stage. So from a research standpoint, this was one of the most fascinating things, I think, in this whole book project, was realizing that what all of these ancient wisdom traditions aspire toward has the same exact definition of what modern scientists call flow. So in Buddhism, it's nirvana. In Taoism, it's the way. The Stoics talked about losing yourself. The Greeks talked about arete in the West, like excellence that transforms the self. And common to all of these like end of the spiritual path destinations is a minimization of yourself. So like you transcend yourself, there's egolessness. And perhaps the defining attribute of flow is that you are so involved in and presence for what you're doing, you forget that yourself exists. So in Tibetan Buddhism, they give like the example of orgasm, of sex. Is like a flow, is like a nirvana experience, because you literally like you can lose yourself. And it's no different than the artist at the easel who's like just becomes one with the work, or the athlete that is out there doing their thing, and like there is no more Chalene, there is no more road, there is no more running, it just is. And for me, it was just so neat to see that like, oh my gosh, like all these ancient wisdom traditions are pointing toward like what today we know is the key to performance and to well-being. There's all this research that shows that the more times we spend in flow, the better that we feel and the healthier that we are. And I think that's because flow is like the opposite of a state of ego or angst. Because ego angst is like, well, what could happen to me? Mm-hmm. Or what are people going to think of me? Or what happens if I win or if I lose? Where flow, like there is none of that. It just is happening. So that was like very interesting just from an intellectual research perspective to be like, oh, wow, like this is probably true with the capital of T because people have been talking about it for millennia. So now how to get from like the esoteric flow down to how to actually get in the zone. I think that there's an element of letting it happen, not making it happen. So like the worst way to try to get into flow is to try to force yourself into it. And then in non-athletic pursuits, minimizing distractions. So your environment has a huge impact on whether or not you can achieve these states. So if your cell phone's buzzing, if your email client's open and the little, red dot is beeping in your computer, it's very hard to get into like a fully present flow state. Whereas if you can just work through like the first 10 minutes of whatever you're doing, whatever's in front of you, then you give yourself a chance of grooving in. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chalene, though, because it's very different, like with the executives and entrepreneurs I coach who live in a world of distraction. And perhaps it's the opposite when like you're lining up and it's like just you and the freaking road. There's probably a whole other set of challenges that can get in the way of flow.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that how you acquire flow is you actually have to practice and like set yourself up an environment for flow, like you described. I personally, in my career, would utilize specific workouts that would start to train the brain to enter into a state of flow. So if I were getting ready for the New York City Marathon in 2017, there were specific workouts where I would consciously say like, okay, today I'm going to work on like training my brain. I'm going to visualize aspects of the New York City Marathon course. I am going to take myself and transmit myself to that course, and my brain is going to be out there running, so that when the day arrives that I toe the line in New York, I'm literally actually going to turn off my brain and I'm going to enter into a state of flow. And the work that I've done has already been done. I am now just going to go execute. And so I actually don't, when athletes enter into a state of flow and into a performance, there's not actually, people ask all the time, like, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, hopefully there's actually nothing that I'm thinking about. There's literally no thoughts. It's an empty brain, and an empty brain will have optimal performance in my mind. Like is how I try to prepare myself. So when 2017, I had maybe the most heightened, like, sense of flow that I have ever experienced. It was like the running poured out of me and the fitness just poured out of me. I couldn't make a bad decision because my body couldn't help but make the right decisions for me. So there were literally no thoughts in my brain until like I finished, the last like 100 meters, and I was accepting of what was happening. But until then, it was just this incredible state of flow. And I think if anyone thinks back about like any of their top performances, whether it's in writing or like musician, there's something special and unique. And it's probably because they've achieved this like state of flow that is just so organic. But I do believe there has to be an element of practicing for it and kind of training yourself for it to get the best out of yourself. But environment is huge. So I would utilize those practice environments to cultivate flow.
I just had a chill down the spine moment, not only thinking of you winning the New York City Marathon, and also, and we hadn't talked about this before, but like in all these ancient Eastern wisdom traditions, they describe the highest state of mind as emptiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that was the word that you just used. Like there is no mind, it's just empty. And we often hear emptiness in the West and we're like, oh, that's scary. Like there's no sense of self. What's going on? Like I don't want to be empty. But what you're saying is it's like it's so freeing, because if there's no self, then there's no worry. You're just doing the thing.
I would describe it like if I could be in the best possible position in a race, it was that things were flowing out of me. Like I literally couldn't help but I made all the right decisions, and it wasn't conscientious. It just happened. And the brain is empty, and it's like, it's very rare when the brain is empty and there are literally no thoughts. It's an incredible place to be. And I feel like when people are at their best, it's actually with an empty brain.
I mean, I feel like my brain has never been empty. Like this sounds like pure bliss. And when you were talking about getting into the flow and like you can't try, it just has to happen. I'm thinking about how every night I lay in bed and I try to fall asleep, and I'm like, you can't try to fall asleep. You just have to fall asleep.
Yeah, but I would push back and say like during conversations like this, I'm sure like your brain is like, well, what question should I ask next, or how should I steer the conversation? It's always easier to be a guest on a podcast because you truly just get to be in the moment.
Totally.
But I've listened to your podcast enough, Lindsay. Like it's too good for your brain to be all over the place. Like I do sense that when you're having these conversations, there are moments when you're just in it.
I mean, I appreciate that. I think so. I mean, I do think at the end of the day, on days that I record interviews, like those are my best days. Even if like a couple hours before I know, oh shoot, I really need like 30 more minutes to like read some things and prep. At the end of the conversation and at the end of the day, my spirit is like fed from these conversations for sure.
Yeah, that's something that is comes up all the time with my entrepreneur coaching clients, because so much of your job as a founder is just to like do what's in front of you. And often these really smart people that are like highly creative and intellectual, they just get caught in days and weeks and even months where they're just like keeping the doors opening and closing. And they come back and they're like, I'm a worse partner or I'm a worse parent because like I'm irritated, I'm angry, I'm edgy. And often the solution for this is just building in an hour of deep work every day, so they feel like they got something done where they could be present for it. And like the page was blank and then they wrote the memo. In this case, like there was no conversation and then the conversation was done. And having that kind of like moment, or I guess in this case, moments of deep work, it's really nourishing. And then it makes you significantly happier and better the rest of the day. I know we're talking about the practice of groundedness, but something that I love about Chalene and Elise's book that comes out just shortly after Rise and Run is like the importance of mornings. And I think that they thread the needle really well, because some people are night people. Like there's nothing biologically special about like needing to crush it in the morning. And for most people, starting off your day with a sense of like deep work, accomplishment, fulfillment just sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I think that's true whether you're a morning or a night person. Because I think that the days that are the worst are when you just kind of get caught up in like the frenetic energy and busyness of life. And then dinner rolls around and you feel like you haven't really done anything. So then it compounds, because now you're not present for your partner, or you're not present for your kids because you're freaking out about the fact that you haven't really done anything. And I think setting aside time to do something is the easiest. The simple is not easy, but it's the simplest way to overcome that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally it. That's totally one of the reasons why I feel better at the end of the day when I've recorded a podcast. I've done the thing, you know. I'm curious, you know, we're all parents, and you know, this is something, even like morning routines with my kids. Like I'm very adamant, like my oldest son gets up before everybody and he wants to just watch TV, and I'm like, I try so hard because I want him to have these like good morning habits too, and you know, all these things, but I'm also know he's 9, you know? So I'm curious. I know I'm a few steps ahead of you guys in this regard with parenting, but like how will you, or how do you think you will try to instill these qualities in your kids?
Who's going to go first?
This is hard. Parenting is so hard.
Yeah, parenting is hard.
I'm the weak link here. I feel like I haven't gotten to the point of actual like parenting quite yet, because I mean, maybe it's just starting, but Jack can't talk yet. He knows where his belly button is and he knows where his nose is, and there's a few things that like we communicate on, but I mean, hopefully your kids just want to emulate you. So I hope by involving him in my life and my routines, there's one like silly routine that I have had for a long time, but I feel like when you talk about setting the tone for the day, I love music. And so I always am playing music in the morning. I also try to catch up on the news and whatnot. Some days, not all days, but I play music, and generally it's kind of loud in my house with music, get the energy going. And I've thrown a dance party by myself like for years, and now Jack is part of the dance party. So we are always like dancing in the morning and actually in the evening. So that's kind of like my routine that I hope to instill in him, is like this celebration of the day is starting, and you know, I play different music, whether it's like reggae or it's some, you know, rock music, whatever. That's kind of going to be my thing, that I've made a conscientious like decision, like I want to make him appreciate the day, and we're going to play music in the morning.
I love it. Just wait
love
till
it.
he's 4 and you turn on music and he's like, Paw Patrol.
Yeah.
Because that day is coming, Shalane.
Okay.
Oh.
Whatever it is, we'll get a little bit of both and officiate.
We do
I
both in our
agree
house. We
I
do
agree
kids and
completely.
fun music. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I agree with you, Lindsay, and you're the furthest down the road here with more kids and older kids, but your kids are constantly watching you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you show up and emulate, like, not just talk about these things, but live them, that's probably like 99.99% of it. And then, you mentioned something is half jokingly, but I know it's also half serious. Like, your kid's 9, Theo's 3.5, Jack is 1.5 or 2, whatever. Like, it's really the worst thing that you can do, I think, is to be overly rigid and to treat your kid like a little adult, because they're not.
Yep.
And easier to say than to do. But my sense is, if you're the parent that is like, a screen time police person, or you're the parent that like never lets your kid like make a huge mess, that'll work great until your kid's in middle school or high school, and then they'll become addicted to watching shows. So I think like there's a middle way here of like, what are some boundaries that shouldn't be crossed? And then kind of like everything else goes, and just keep it fun. That's the other thing that, and I'm no parenting expert. I heard this on a podcast that so often with young kids, we're giving them direction and we're managing them because we have to, just to keep them safe. But we should also make sure that we pause and be like, Theo, I love wrestling with you. Or like, Theo, I love doing this thing with you. So that they get the feedback that, hey, like, mom and dad isn't just like our boss, they're our friend. Because as kids get older, that's, ideally how the relationship evolves. Yeah, and then just keep it fun. Like, we don't do a dancing routine because that would be terrifying. But I try to, like, we call it training. So every Saturday morning, Theo joins me for a strength workout. And he does reindeer hops. He says, look at this move. I mean, it is the furthest thing from strength training. Sometimes he will lay on the ground and like take turns poking one ear and then the other ear with his index finger. He'll be like, what's this one called? I'm like, that's the finger move. So just having him like associate like positive feelings with some kind of movement versus like, oh, here's how you do a push-up. I don't like the stuff that he does is the furthest thing from strength training, and it's great.
Sorry, my dog is barking like a maniac. Could you hear her?
No, what kind of dog do you have?
She's like she's a mutt. She's I don't even know. She's like 50 pounds. She's old. She's 13. I don't know if my husband's home with the kids or if it's like the mailman or what.
I forget, Lindsay, you have 3 or 4 kids? 4
boys.
Yeah. So like, what's your advice?
Well, I host a parenting podcast too, not because I'm an expert, because I want to hear from experts. So side note there. When you were talking about being a friend to your kid, it's funny because I grew up, I don't know if you guys grew up this way, but my parents would always say like, I'm not your friend, I'm your parent. And as I've been hosting this other parenting podcast, I've really been like reading books and exploring how I want to do parenting and accepting that I do it differently than my parents did. And that's okay. And it's not taking anything away from what they did. And it's okay that, I want to do things differently. So I actually do all the time when I'm snuggling with whoever wants to snuggle at the given time. You never know. But I'll take it when it comes. I just say, you're my best friend. And I'm like, I'm breaking all the rules when I say that, but I mean it in my heart.
I go, hey, best friend. When he wakes up from his naps, I say that. Oh, that makes me happy.
Yeah, I'm like, who cares if I was grown up being told that?
I think that's a generational difference.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised. And the only reason like I can even offer this comment is because I was having a conversation with my friend Ryan about like parenting different than we were parented. And not to like throw shade at everyone, 65 and over or whatever, but I think part of the reason we got the culture of like heroic individualism and what the book on groundedness tries to address is that like the boomer culture was very much one about like achievement and meritocracy and like putting in the work and getting results. And I think that rubbed off on parenting very much. Like the goal of parenting is to have a well-adjusted, good kid.
Mm-hmm.
To have a kid that goes to a good school, to have a kid that runs fast, like whatever it is. And I think that you see in our generation, so like millennials, Gen X, it's much more of like, we want things to be meaningful and we kind of just want to have fun. And I think the kind of parenting that we're all describing, and there's no right or wrong, they're just different styles, is much more in aligned with like, there's probably a higher chance that like our kids are going to end up in jail than we did, but there's also a higher chance like they're going to have fun and they won't be as anxious. And like there's, so I'm withholding values judgment, but I'm not surprised that like the pendulum kind of swings.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just harder now too in certain aspects because of technology and things like that. And we didn't hit on that. And I know that we're kind of getting to the end here, but I know that is one of the big talking points in the book is like how social media and technology, like maybe we feel fulfilled for like 4 seconds, but in the grand scheme of things, we are so much less fulfilled because of the scrolling. And that's one of the things with parenting that I'm like, I do not want my kids falling into that trap.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's something that I think about all the time. As I said, with your oldest and Theo, I'm thankful that I'm a few years behind because I don't want to have to think about that. I toy around with the idea, but then it becomes like way too much work and way too public of running for school board. Ooh. Is like a single issue candidate. And it would be social media is absolutely prohibited until high school. Not just in schools, but out of schools. And if you're reported for using social media, like there's some kind of disciplinary action. Because what I've heard happens is that you can have your kids not be on social media, mm-hmm. but if everyone else is, then your kids are getting left out. And that's really bad too. So it has to be a community thing. Because if all your kids' friends are on TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is, and they're not, well, then they're going to struggle mightily because they're left out. But if everyone's on those platforms, like airbrushing pictures, sharing porn at age 9, whatever it may be, that's also really bad. We all have boys. I am really grateful for that, for the only reason that I cannot imagine the experience of a middle school girl. Just because we know that at least at younger ages, body image stuff tends to affect girls more for all kinds of cultural reasons that are batshit crazy, but it is what it is. And I cannot imagine having a 10 or 11-year-old with like an Instagram account.
I don't think I would let them. I mean, my oldest is 9, so I'm kind of approaching that. I actually interviewed a therapist about this, and I was specifically asking her, like, what age will you let your kids have social media? And she said that the research shows that, like, if you're going to let them do it, 16 is the age where, like, their brain development has made a little bit of headway where like they can handle it better. But handing an Instagram account or a TikTok account to a 12-year-old in middle school, I mean, I am so thankful that we avoided that. You know, like we didn't avoid it, like it wasn't here, but like we didn't have to walk through that as kids.
Yeah, because it's hard enough for adults to have a even medium to healthy relationship with social media. When you have family and fully developed prefrontal cortex and like career, and for a kid, like I know I am personally not on Instagram because I know that like if there was a thing where I was posting pictures of me, like I just wouldn't enjoy it and it wouldn't be good for me. And it's like it's just another area that for me, it would be like, like I have to be public about this, or like, and anyone that says that they don't care about external validation is full of shit, because then you wouldn't tweet or post if you didn't. Now you might not care that much and you might like get better at it. And it can be 80% connecting with other people and 20% caring, but some of it is caring about that stuff. And for me, it's like, if there's one more place where I have to care what people think about me, it's just one too many. And to try to have a kid understand that and make that decision, again, especially in an age where like your sense of self is truly forming, it's a tall task.
You know, I actually am recording another interview tonight at 6:30 with my friend Sarah Canny, and she just totally went off social media. She's just, I don't want to live this life anymore. You know, Cal Newport, do you know who that is?
Yeah, I'm good friends with Cal.
Okay. Oh yeah, I think you've referenced him in your book. Like, she read his book, and like she's done all this research on what it's doing to her life and her brain. She's like, I'm just not doing it anymore. And it's a really hard thing to do when you're promoting your business on it. And Shalane, for like your team and athletes, I mean, it's a very like growing important thing for the brands to post pictures and be engaging with your audience. So there's this like really fine balance.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the athletes nowadays make a lot more income because of it. And so you want them to have, you know, the window of an athlete is not very long for the most part. And so they want to capitalize on that. But at the same time, like, I think it can be exhausting. Like, I find myself just getting tired and kind of like, don't have the energy to look at it or even post anything. I feel like I kind of come and go. I feel like I used to be very into it and felt engaged, but I think recently it feels more draining than engaging to a degree. And I think it goes through waves, like I said, but it's tricky. Yeah. For athletes, it's become a source of income now. And so it's like, what kind of, you know, message are you sending and what kind of partnerships are you building? And, you know, you got to take stock of like your values and what's important and trying to align all the time with what's important to you. It's tricky to navigate. And yeah, the ability, it's an amazing platform because you get to say exactly what you want to say, which is great. But you have to be very careful about who you follow. I think like who you follow cultivates also like your mindset. And so being protective about like what you're seeing and not diving too far off of like what you intend to follow, I think can be kind of the key to not getting too exhausted or overwhelmed or influenced negatively.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you ever worry that, maybe worry is not the right word, but like if your athletes are paying too much attention to the success of other athletes?
Yeah, you know, Cindy McLaughlin just like did this beautiful post recently, and you know, just a video of herself sitting in her car crying, and you know, just saying how like I'm deserving of respect, and I'm not like, she basically was saying like people think I have all these followers because of the way I look and the things that you know, I'm doing on social media, but she's like, I don't care about that. Like, I just want to be respected for the work that I do. And I think the ability for people to just go on and say really mean, hurtful things, you have to have super thick skin. And, you know, I think she was really eloquent in the way she was describing how she just wanted to be respected, and that this fame that was bestowed upon her isn't something she necessarily sought out. Like, it's just part of her job, but that like the social media and those other aspects aren't important to her. Her work is the utmost important to her, and being respected in her work.
I was just gonna say, like, I think that you first off, that Cindy McLaughlin video is incredible. So any listener like should go watch it. Because what I heard is like, I'm one of the best athletes in the world.
Yeah.
So don't tell me about my hair or my makeup or like my fashion. I am one of the best athletes in the world. I can't control what I look like. I can't control my skin tone. I train really hard, and I want to be respected for my athletic performance.
Yes.
And she said it much more elegantly than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, though.
The other thing though is like, I do think there's a cost benefit analysis with social media. Like, what are you getting from it, and what is it costing you? Because like, as I said, I'm not on Instagram, but I'm on Twitter. And I think that Chalene, I think how we met is like before Peak Performance came out, you saw someone retweet something that I wrote, and then like you followed me and I followed you, and like we started, like that is how we started talking. And now we've become pretty close friends. Would have never happened without Twitter.
Totally.
We wouldn't be having this conversation without Twitter.
Yep.
So I do think that like we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think that the question that I don't have the answer for, and there's an individual question, and then I think there's a societal question, which is how do you get the cost benefit equation to be net positive?
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to dig into that more with Sarah Canny, everybody. So stay tuned for that episode. Actually, that episode's coming out before this episode. So hopefully you...
Hopefully she's already answered the question.
Yes, hopefully you have all already listened to that. Okay, let's wrap up here. I hear 2 of my children have returned to the house, and you guys probably need to carry on with your day as well. What are the last takeaways? Like, if you could, we obviously want everybody to go buy this book, but what are the last takeaways that you want to leave the audience with in regards to the messaging behind the book?
I think 2 things. I think that, and this is something that's in the later parts of the book, that in the culture, we tend to look at things in extremes and very black and white. So there's the be self-discipline, wake up at 4 a.m., Jocko Willink, discipline is freedom, personal responsibility camp. And then there's the let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and self-love and be kind camp. And I think that you need both. I think that like true wisdom and true fulfillment and performance comes from when you marry fierce self-discipline with fierce self-compassion. Because if you try to be really self-disciplined and go for things, you better learn how to be self-compassionate because it's really hard. And if you want to do hard things, then you have to do hard things. And I think like a rich and granular life comes from doing hard things. So that'd be the first thing. And then the second thing, back to imposter syndrome, is like, I still can't believe that like Chalene thinks that I helped her with anything from my coaching and my writing. It's nuts. Like I am feeling imposter syndrome right now. So it's like everyone feels it. And I think instead of judging it, we should like try to turn it into humility or even gratitude. Like how grateful I am that I'm here with you ladies talking about this book and that you actually take an interest in it. So I could say that's imposter syndrome, but I could also say like, wow, like this is pretty neat, and try to focus on the, wow, this is pretty neat.
I love that. Okay. I always wrap up with best most recent books. So your list of books, your list of books at the end of your book. Have you read all those books? That's so many books.
Yeah, but I'm like a pro reader and writer, right? It's what I get paid to do. Like Shalane's run a lot of miles and you've released thousands of podcasts. So yes, I have read all those books, but I don't expect anyone else to.
I love reading too. I wish I could read fast. I think I don't read very fast because I do dedicate like a solid 30 to 45 minutes every morning when I wake up, but I don't get through books very fast. What of that list though? Like we read 2. What do you recommend?
Oh, 2?
I know
That's
there's
so
literally,
hard.
you guys, there's literally like 58 recommendations.
Right now, there are a lot in here, but it's great. Well read.
So I think a book by David White that I think I recommended to Chalene called Crossing the Unknown Sea. And David White is a poet, but this is like a nonfiction book of prose, and it's all about like transitions. Is a really good and beautiful book. And then the second book I'd recommend, I can't believe you're forcing me to just do 2. We talked a lot about acceptance.
You can do more.
Well, then read all 54 or whatever's back there. But Tara Brach wrote a book called Radical Acceptance.
Okay.
And if that's a topic that from the start of our conversation resonated with listeners, I quote her quite a bit in the book. But if you want to like really dive deep into that topic, I'd recommend her book. Chalene, what about you? Oh, and Rise and Run. Like go pre-order.
Oh yeah.
And Elise's
give it a plug. Give it a plug.
Yeah, that comes out October 19th, we hope. Because of COVID, shipping's getting a little crazy, but yeah, lots of good recipes and some training. I have a 14-week training program for marathoners, actually designed for Elise. So she's running her first marathon in New York City this fall, and we're celebrating our 40th birthday. So lots of fun stuff.
Oh, that's so big.
Yeah. So, no, I tend to just read whatever Brad tells me to read. So.
Does anybody have any beach reads?
Time on knowing whether something's going to be good or not. So I really go on just strict like recommendations. I'm really bad about that, but yeah, I feel like I have limited time to actually read, so I want to make sure if I do, I'm going to really enjoy it and it's going to be really good. Yeah, I'm going to do a flash cover. This is it's not his hard cover, but it's the soft cover.
There it is.
And
Here,
then
look, I have a
beach
chair.
reading. My wife, who I can't get to read my book, is reading a book called The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave.
Oh, I've heard of
And
that. Okay.
she said that it is the equivalent of like eating peanut M&Ms is a book.
Oh, the last thing he told me, I need a book like that because you've got me reading all this serious stuff. I need a book like
go
that.
check out The Last Thing He Told Me. That's Caitlin's recommendation.
Oh, I'm so glad Caitlin gave us a recommendation. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was a blast.
All right. Well, we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.